Chris Trump for KaijuPop.com, and welcome back to our monthly looks at gaming history as we take it back 20 years to March of 1994. And this was a pretty huge month. We're going to look at 6 of March 94's major releases. And it seems kind of weird to say, but like this kind of important Atlas RPG on the Super Famicom was one of the less important releases of March 1994. And if you're not sure what it is yet, don't particularly blame you. This wasn't something that readily made its way to the West particularly easily, but or neither is it something that you can read easily unless you're familiar with your kanji. But this is Shin Megami Tensei 2. On Super Famicom, following up obviously from Shin Megami Tensei 1 and part of a very long running series from Atlas. Recently Shin Megami Tensei 4 I know made its way to the West on 3DS, came out on 3DS here in Japan last year. And of course, kind of, I guess Persona is more famous now, and that's began as a spin-off from this massive series, which is kind of bloated. There's more spin-offs and side things to Shin Megami Tensei than there are Shin Megami Tensei games. There's like 4 mainline games, and then a whole bunch of, Devil Survivor and everything like that on the outside. Now, there is no way I'm going to have time to kind of do this justice, so I'm just going to really quickly run through the first few minutes as a male voice is telling me to wake up there. And yeah, I haven't played Shin Megami Tensei 2 at all, so this isn't the best way to do it. A very quick little look, probably not the best way to look at Shin Megami Tensei 2 here. I did play a fair bit of 4, and didn't like it much, so it isn't really my kind of thing. Kind of very dungeon crawly, old school RPG-ing going on here. But here we go. Okamoto, I think. I'll butcher my reading there. When are you going to wake up? Like every RPG, you start off asleep, apparently, because it's an RPG. There's a tournament going on. Yeah, and I don't know. People are going to get very angry with me for not being familiar, but the idea behind these videos is just to take a quick look of what was happening every month rather than actually going in depth to these games. But yeah, kind of they seem to share similar characters and similar themes, similar traits, similar things about changing the future and demonic stuff. But yeah, with different things changing every time. Shin Megami Tensei 4 had you kind of jumping back and forth between dystopian futures and kind of medieval times sort of thing. I really didn't like that game very much, didn't get very far to be honest. But I'm being told to start my training here. What shall I do? I suppose I'll do the training. Virtual trainer, wow. Yeah, so in Shin Megami Tensei 4 you were running around, in third person, but here we've got some wireframe first person 3D going on here, so very typical dungeon crawly stuff, and then you get 3 zombies. And the deal with Shin Megami Tensei is that you could talk to your foes and kind of win them over onto your side. That is always the Atlas twist and the Shin Megami Tensei twist to combat. But of course, everything you do is hidden behind these dice rolls, which I never really got into, to be honest. I can never get by this kind of combat. It's just not something I can deal with. But yeah, I mean, people love these RPGs, and it's bizarre to think that this is something that I'm not going to go into that much more detail on, because it's one of the least important titles that came out this month. But we're going to dot about, and we're going to return to the Super Famicom in time for our main game this month. But before then, let's head over to the good old Mega Drive. It's 19XX. I think Shin Megami Tensei 2 is in 20XX actually in Tokyo. And you might be a little bit more familiar with this opening sequence. Not necessarily though. As a bomb goes off in the background. This isn't the most fondly remembered game of this series, but it's this series. Yeah, that's him. There's that sound effect. It's Bare Knuckle 3 on the Mega Drive, better known in the rest as Streets of Rage 3. Yeah, so, I mean, this is kind of the I don't know, ugly stepdaughter or whatever, the red-headed stepchild of the Streets of Rage family, for whatever reason. You know, Streets of Rage 1 kind of got things going. Streets of Rage 2 was just this phenomenal combination of gameplay and some of the best 16-bit music that there ever was. And then Streets of Rage 3 kind of, I don't know, ruined things to an extent. Just didn't quite have the same magic. Still had some great music. I'll let play in the background there. Still had that, you know, always satisfying, but impressive play. Still had that local co-op. But there was just, it just wasn't quite as memorable as its counterparts. This was the second sequel, of course, from Sega in a couple of months, because we had Sonic 3 last month, if you're a regular viewer, all 5 of you. And yeah, I mean, this kind of shares something with Sonic 3 in terms of trying to do little things that are different to the overall formula, but that actually, you know, for the most part, kind of stayed largely the same and stayed true to what it was. Streets of Rage 3, of course, developed in Japan, just like the first two were. Sonic 3 kind of, you know, I mean, Sonic had this kind of transition period where Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 were actually made in the US, and the original idea with Sonic 3 was for it to be this isometric 3D game like Sonic 3D was, and then they kind of said, no, we shouldn't do anything anywhere near that ambitious, and let's get more out of this usual system here. And I don't think there ever was anything like any kind of ambitious plans for Streets of Rage 3 or Bare Knuckle 3. It's alright. But it is kind of familiar, and the changes that they did make with it, I think, kind of upset a lot of people by having things like putting there's energy meters on the weapons that you have, and they kind of wear away. So it kind of wears down at the power fantasy of nailing people with lead pipes in Streets of Rage games. Is this guy dead yet? No, he's off the scroll. This is kind of a cardinal sin in beat 'em ups. Having your bad guys off screen and you punching blindly off the side there. But I'm doing alright. Actually, the more I play it, the more I kind of enjoying this. But yeah, it's just, even kind of, I think the way it looks kind of more grainy, just not as nice as Streets of Rage 2 did. It kind of feels like they wanted to make things more gritty, and it's not quite as brash and bold looking. The music's okay, but it's not quite as brash and bold sounding either, and certainly nowhere near as iconic a soundtrack as Streets of Rage 2 is. run over by a flamethrower in Egypt. But yeah, certainly it's something that suits itself more to a quick gameplay video than Shin Megami Tensei 2 does. So you see there, yeah, that dagger has an energy bar, and I know, like, the kind of intent behind that is to, hey, stop spamming weapons and that kind of thing. But spamming weapons is part of the joys of this kind of genre, really. It's that and finding chickens in bins and eating them. There's not much beyond that, so, you know, give us our little pleasures. So yeah, they're notably not quite as well received as the other games in the series, and probably with good reason. So another fondly remembered 16-bit series appearing on Mega Drive in March of 1994. This is Akamajo Dracula, Vampire Killer, perhaps better known as Castlevania Bloodlines in America. Less well known as Castlevania The New Generation in Europe and Australia, where it was pretty heavily censored. Yeah, this was the first Castlevania game on Mega Drive, I think the only one. And it's sort of loosely based on Rondo of Blood, which was the PC Engine version of Castlevania. This had come out after Super Castlevania 4. Which was on the SNES, obviously, and was perhaps one of the most well-known or well-loved kind of Castlevania games of this sort of linear era before everything went non-linear with the PlayStation, Game Boy Advance games, and from there on. So, given that Castlevania 4 was this really flashy, gorgeous technical showcase for the Super Famicom, I think this is kind of less, well remembered, because I think most people kind of attribute Castlevania as a Nintendo kind of thing, and because, well, yeah, that's a dead dude. He won't be giving us any trouble. For now, yeah, I think because Castlevania is kind of more well known as a Nintendo property, unofficially, in the same way that most people kind of equate Call of Duty with Xbox instead of PlayStation, even though it's out, there's versions on both. I think that, plus the fact that this is just, it's not as immediately as technically striking as Castlevania 4 was. I think people I want to, perhaps forget about it, but this was really well received at the time, and I think fans of Castlevania do hold Bloodlines in high regard. It's just, I guess, fewer people have played it, and yeah, it's strange going back to a Castlevania from this kind of era, in that it is such a much more linear experience, and much more focused on difficult platforming as the early Castlevania games were to kind of accepted, I suppose. It is just a tough left to right romp that feels a lot more like it feels like the Castlevania games of its era, but this opening walk through a Romanian castle should be familiar with anyone who played the first Castlevania game. And yeah, it's got the same picky uppy items on one button. It's nice playing this sort of very old school Castlevania style of thing. I never actually played Castlevania 4, but I played I actually haven't played that much Castlevania, but I played the original on the NES, and I've played this, obviously, but it's nice to be able to play a Castlevania game with a jump and an separate item button. You didn't give me any trouble there at all. Put up about as much fight as that guy who was fighting off those birds at the beginning there. But yeah, this, to me, it feels like a prettier version of the original Castlevania game, which is no bad thing, and it's really nice, really solid platforming, just perhaps not quite as immediately technically striking as what had come just before it, I think, which is why most people tend to forget about it. But it was a good offering in March of '94. But why don't we, for the time being, head away from consoles and have a look at what was coming out on home computers in March '94. So our next game from March of 1994 is this, Beneath the Steel Sky, which came out on Amiga and PC in March. What we're actually looking at here is the anniversary remastered edition that came out 5 years ago on iOS, just because it's going to be, it looks pretty much the same apart from interface-wise. It's a little bit different, and it's just going to make things a little bit smoother to run here. And Beneath the Steel Sky came from Revolution, who would later become well known for the Broken Sword series of games. And as I just get a little metal pipe there, and yeah, but this was before Broken Sword. Broken Sword, incidentally, just had a new. They kickstarted a new Broken Sword episodic game thing that's just made it to iOS from PC and from the Vita, I think, in Europe, but really apparently hasn't really garnered particularly good reviews, which is a shame. But what set Beneath Steel Sky apart at the time was a couple of things. First of all, was some really great art direction, which I can't remember how you use things in this. It's been a long time since I've actually played this particular game. Shit. Oh, there we go. A couple of things sort of set this apart from other point-and-click games at the time. And first was... Ooh, I'm in trouble here. Go. Oh, he's coming after me. It's just a little interstitial there. But I'm going to have to do something. Shut that. And he's going to come out. Yes. And then I'm going to be dangling from the edge. Basically, I'm running away from these cops who are after me for some unknown reason. I have amnesia. Ooh. And can't quite remember some sort of incident that sort of led me to a mysterious sort of pseudo-Amerindian tribe, but I grew up with them, and now everybody is after me for some reason. I think the first thing that set this out was some fantastic artwork. This was all done by Dave Gibbon, I believe it was, who later garnered fame for writing Watchmen, the comic, which later became a film and such. And also there was a couple of interesting things that it did with interface. This wasn't... the original interface obviously doesn't look like this because this is kind of redone for the touch version of the game, so, you know, apologies if it doesn't look quite the same. But the basic idea was the same. Rather than having...
It's wheezing and banging, like an asthmatic dinosaur in the mating season.
Master of simile. Rather than having the usual sort of verb list that you'd have at this kind of in this kind of game, what you would have instead was a very sort of UI clean kind of area where it was just a simple left click to move and right click to sort of inspect and bring up this kind of, the eye and the cogs that indicate that you can interface with some stuff. And that was interesting to kind of create this very clean looking game. And what I'm going to use here is my robot parts. If this cooperates, there we go. Oh wait.
I'm not picking it up. I
think I need something else, do I?
That's no use. There's no jug.
Of course, no jug, obviously. Let's see, what did I have to do here? It was interesting here as well that unlike the LucasArts games of the time, you could actually die in this game. That scene right at the start where we started out, I could quite easily have just walked down the stairs and been in deep trouble. But is it this? Do I use this? It's been such a long time that since I've played this game. It's yeah, it's but it's usually fair. I mean, it's one of those games where you interact with everything, and it's not like the Sierra games where there was just ridiculously cheap deaths all the time. It's reasonably fair, and I think like the other thing that's interesting about this was the dialogue system at the time. I'm not gonna get to. I think I'll talk to the engineer that's in here as I recall. A lot of games of this era would kind of have extremely repetitive dialogue, and you would kind of say the same things to the same lines to people, and you'd get the same kind of responses. And the dialogue trees in Beneath the Steel Sky, and to an extent Broken Sword as well.
Who's in charge, and where can I find him?
It's lamb you'll be wanting.
Apart from, I mean, disregard the kind of very sort of low bitrate speech samples, which they didn't tidy up for the re-release. But I think, it's even these were added in later in the CD version. I think the original just came with text, certainly on the Amiga version it did.
With the help of Link.
What's that?
But
The computer they built as their advance.
yeah, it's all kind of very Orwellian. There's a computer in charge of everything with Link. But the trick with this was kind of, you could say the same, you could have conversations with people, and rather than just going 10 times, where do I need to go? Oh, you need to go to the house over there. If you went back and asked the same thing, you would get different dialogue, and the characters getting progressively more irritated with you. I told you it was over there. I'm just not going to talk to you anymore. And that was kind of clever.
Fire exit leads nowhere.
It's also, I mean, apart from the fantastic, not so fantastic
Break your legs.
voice acting going on here, it's well written. It was a really good, well crafted game. There was a lot of, I suppose, sort of cyberpunk stuff was popular at the time, and Lawnmower Man and such, and sort of things like that. And there was lots of sort of jacking into the Matrix later on. And it was certainly a really, really good little point-and-click adventure. And it's well worth checking out if you just want it touch on your iPad. It's certainly worth a little look. But let's look at one more Amiga/DOS game from March of '94. Okay, next in the parade of hits for March of 1994, you might be familiar just by looking at it, but probably not. UFO Enemy Unknown, which came to DOS in March of 1994 in Europe, a little bit later on the Amiga, but not much later. And then, made its way to the States under the different and more familiar name of XCom. Because UFO had already been taken. And it's one case where I think probably XCOM is a better name, so it's one case where the copyright situation worked out quite well, I think. So here I am setting up Kaiju Towers, and one thing that really hits me, I didn't play the original XCOM, confess there, but I have played a lot of the new remade version that Firaxis did. And one thing that really struck me as being different was just how kind of impenetrable this version is if you haven't played it, and if you don't have a manual especially. This is a game where all the tutorializing is done in the massive 600-page manual or whatever that comes with the game, and yeah, it's really hard to get going, and it is like a sort of statement of how games have become much more accessible lately. If not, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. There's a lot of hurry up and wait I've kind of found when I was playing XCOM here, so unlike with the console version where it just goes whoosh and it whizzes forward and just lets you know when the next event happens. Here you're free to sort of control the path of time and skip forward in increments of 5 seconds up to a day. Sometimes I'd forget when I was playing this, and I'd have the time setting down to the smallest 5-second increment that you're watching here, and just see a little ship fly really slowly towards this UFO, and then go, oh, I should probably actually ratchet the time up on this one. But basically, yeah, I mean, there's kind of a lot of sort of proper planning is really important, and you can make bad decisions in the opening sections of XCOM that will haunt you for the rest of your game. But yeah, without knowing that, I was kind of plundering around in this little playthrough here. And yeah, little scenes like this are not particularly exciting. Watching radar blips happen, and you blow up a UFO and you go, hooray! And then you kind of go back to waiting some more, really. But I think that's what was an appeal to the original XCOM was just, and I think the most recent XCOM as well, just really slow drama. Everything was building towards things. It's all procedural. It's all, you order some resources and you wait for them to arrive, and you get funding reports and things, and just knowing that there's a pending doom around the corner as the sun sets on your world and then rises again, and you get some extra stuff and some extra people, and you go, right, I'll reassign him here, and I'll put more people into my research of extra things, so I'll be alright when stuff eventually happens. And I know stuff's gonna happen. I know at some point things are gonna kick off over here, but I don't know when. And like, I think there's a lot to be said for that. It's clearly the bones of something awesome and tense were there, and then eventually this happens where you take out a UFO eventually, and then it will crash land, and you go, right, now I can finally send my people in. And this is where it kind of adapts the turn-based strategy approach. This game was made by Julian Gollop, who previously, Julian Gollop was really well known for a bunch of turn-based strategy games on the Spectrum back in the day, but he was most fondly known, I think, for Laser Squad, and this was, in essence, it was a new Laser Squad. I think it was originally conceived as Laser Squad 2, I believe. I might not be entirely right. But it's all about, okay, planning out your movements. You send people out of the interceptor. They go out. They've got, everything's based on dice rolls. You see some percentages. But even this was just really impenetrable playing today and not knowing what each of these icons do. It's all icon driven, and you don't have anywhere near the level of accessibility that you do in Firaxis's game, where it kind of says, oh hey, you can move this far in a turn, for instance. There's no easy, I could find an easy way of doing that in this game. So I would send people out, and they would reach the massive, they'd expend all of their movement points and then be stuck in open cover. So yeah, I was absolutely horrendous at this game, and enjoying it nowhere near as much as the new one. It doesn't hold up, but at the time, it was this gloriously tense, slow drama, and luckily, and I shit you not, my capture software crashed right now, just as I was about to get blown to pieces. From March of 1994, yes, it is Super Metroid. Crazy to think that this sort of came out alongside, your XCOM, your Beneath Steel Sky, these real favorites. But I suppose it's this and XCOM that people really hold 2 decades later as amongst their favorite games of all time. I actually came to Super Metroid very late. The first time I actually played it was on the Wii, just because I didn't have a Super Nintendo at the time, and even afterwards, sort of picking up this stuff, you know, after the point, Super Metroid was one of those games that always held its value really well, and with good reason. So here I'm exploring this creepy base, as you'll be familiar with if you know the original game, and picking up the last surviving Metroid from Metroid 2, the Game Boy game. But I'm about to be decimated here by this boss, because that is the way this is designed. You know, one of those boss battles that you're supposed to lose. It's really interesting. I mean, just from the get-go, there's this creepy, you know, atmosphere of the first enemy fight being this relatively huge boss. He's gonna whiz out through the background here with some nice Mode 7 effects. And this is the European version, by the way, hence the German text. Weirdly, the Japanese version as well supported Japanese and English on the cartridge. It's one of those rare Japanese 16-bit games that actually had multiple language support. And yeah, just this section, really well designed. This opening part where here is, you know, this game that is very, very slow paced, as we're going to discover in a second. But you know, it's doing this kind of sort of flashy, hey, let's show off our Mode 7 stuff. But it's also crap. It's also kind of balls. It should nowhere near be as difficult as this. I can just jump up here. There we go. Sorry, I had to concentrate there for a second. You know, it's showing off, hey, these Mode 7 effects right at the start. Let's have this high-paced opening. And there's real sort of thought going into that. But it's also kind of subtle tutorializing. Hey, it's this boss fight that you're meant to lose. You know, I'm not as familiar with like a sort of JRPG kind of environment. But this boss fight that you're meant to lose, followed by I found it more challenging than I should have. Escape from the base there. That's a chance to show off some nice visual effects, but also teach you how to play the game and how to jump and whatnot. So it's some nice subtle tutorializing. Then you come on to planet Zebes, and yeah, off you go. And it's just, you've gone from that now to this really quiet, really ominous sort of feeling landscape, the rain coming down, the otherworldly music. You can just hear in the background there, just really great ambient sounds, just fantastic design. That as much as, okay, I know people like Metroid Prime, Metroid Prime doesn't have a patch on the atmosphere here. It's just such a chilling game, I think, and yeah, already again this is kind of subtly tutorializing you. It's like it's showing you all of this stuff. It's saying, hey, you're going to be exploring, you're going to be backtracking. Here's this part, you know, right near the start. We already passed like 2 or 3 sections where I couldn't get, you know, there's no way I could get through with my current skill set. So I'm going to pop that open. And again, can't get through there. So it's like, okay, I'll make a mental note. And I think already if you were attuned to this kind of way of thought, then you would have the graph paper at the ready here. Although, you know, here we do actually have a proper map, but you can't make notes on it and say, hey, I'm going to come back here. Instead, it is, you know, purely about you know, going, oh, making mental notes for stuff, and probably inevitably busting out the graph paper. Head down here. And just, yeah, no combat, nothing happening, just plummeting deeper and deeper into the bowels of this earth. And it is, I mean, people make the leap between this and like a Ridley Scott kind of thing. It's very Alien-esque, and it's all about sort of one survivor, one female survivor. So, I mean, Samus is very kind of Ripley-esque, I guess. And yeah, just her surviving in this world and these strange lands, and it's very, very daring. I mean, it's daring now to, like, apart from that opening encounter, not have combat in the first 5 minutes of a game. That's novel. That's novel today, you know, let alone 20 years ago, where it was just instant, quick fix, especially on consoles. I mean, I suppose we saw a UFO just before this, where that was a slow-paced game, but I mean, that was a strategy game. That's kind of different. And here is this action game, or, you know, supposed action game, where suddenly nothing happens for big, long periods. We're moving, we're traversing, we're seeing new stuff, but, you know, we're not, you know, we're not sort of privy to this game's secrets, which is just amazing, you know. Okay, yeah, so now I've got my morph ball, I've got that going on, but still, at this point, no enemies encountered, no quick, sharp, you know, short, sharp shock of action going on here, and very, very rare to have this kind of world building going on, and, you know, extremely refreshing, I think, especially for a console game. I think also, I mean, Metroid did it. The original Metroid on NES did it before this, you know. But it was just this whole, you've always got to love that little jingle where he sticks in the brain. You know, it's impossible not to fall in love with this idea of just exploring this alien world, which still for the time very rare in console gaming, and rare to have this kind of long form kind of approach, I think, to video games. Whereas, you know, I mean, there are speed runs, obviously. This is not exactly elegant, is it? Get up there. Get up there, woman. There we go. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So blast a few rockets of that into there as I realised I had to hit select. I am stupid with these old games. I was stupid back then, though. I mean, this isn't anything new. And pick up some more missiles. I should have read the little tooltip there, and then I would have known. So that was a net gain of nothing. But now I can go back. It's all about sort of making these mental notes that, you know, now people know where they're going, you know, and Metroid that's probably about 3 hours long if you know what you're doing, and there's, as I said, all sorts of speed runs where people have sort of sequence broken everything to blast through this a lot faster, and that's a fascinating kind of subculture unto itself, but yeah, just so eerie, so atmospheric still right now. I mean, granted, I'm fumbling and crap because I can't remember. And now, only now, do we face, you know, a whole bunch of enemies, and that's, like, fascinating, you know. and I'm probably going to get absolutely shagged. I need to get this health. There we go. So it's like now it's kicking off, and I've had this time, and again, I think, you know, today you don't need sort of very long tutorials. There is nothing apart from the little tooltips there at the beginning. Oh, here's how you use your rockets, here's how you use the morph ball, which I think, you know, I mean, it had to be explained. Me, you bastard. You know, that stuff, you couldn't get around not explaining that, but it's like, you don't need to go, okay, here, do this 3 times, because, you know, jump 3 times, walk forward 3 times. Do you know you can lose the left stick to move and the right stick to look? And you don't need that stuff. You can kind of bake it into the gameplay. I know how to jump now because I've had to. And now, you know, it's starting to, okay, here are these ideas that we're introducing, and now it's about layering stuff onto other things. But yeah, I mean, it's the rarest of games. It's a tremendous kind of experience that I suck at. But yeah, it's one that now, even now, it's an essential to, I think, anyone, and it still feels incredibly modern, especially if you play the Game Boy Advance Zero Mission, which came out 10 years after this. I guess it was a 10-year anniversary thing, I suppose, but it came out February 2004, and yeah, on GBA, and that added an epilogue to the game, and it added extra sort of story sequences. You know, and that's probably the way to go if you're GBA equipped, or hopefully at some point they will just put the Zero Mission version up on Virtual Console. But you can get your Super Metroids on your Wii, on your Wii U. I don't think you can get it on 3DS, because I don't think they do 3DS Virtual Console, right? And they're kind of weird about, you know, they don't do Super Nintendo games on 3DS Virtual Console, and then they're weird about doing their GBA stuff, because they're saying, I don't know, there was that weird The Ambista program where you could get the original Metroid. But they're sort of reticent about putting other Game Boy Advance games and Super Nintendo games, because they're Nintendo, and they behave in mysterious ways. But yeah, whichever way you can, be it original hardware, be it emulation or whatever, I mean, this is kind of a touchstone in gaming that everybody should be familiar with, and yeah, it's something you should hunt out, and definitely a fair pick for, you know, the best game of March 1994 in a very crowded month. So if you head on over to kaijupop.com, there'll be a full This Month in Gaming History written feature with highlights from March 2004, 1994, and 1984. There's a video for March 1984 already on our YouTube channel. Subscribe, why don't you? Do whatever. And yeah, Chris Jart for kaijupop.com. Thanks for watching. Bye.